Welcome to the WanderLearn show. I'm your host, Tapon. I'm here with Richard DeLong. First question I'm going to ask him is, how will the war in Russia and Ukraine end? But before we do that, let's find out why he is a good person to ask this question. Richard. So, tell us a little bit about your experience in Eastern Europe.
So I've been living in Eastern Europe for most of my life at this point, even though I was born in the US. And that includes 1 year in Slovakia, 2 years in Russia, 9 years in Ukraine, and now coming up on 11 years in Georgia. So that's one part. The other part
And
is...
you're only 20 years old.
Yeah, that's right, of course. A bit older. And I speak fluent Russian, Ukrainian, more or less fluent Georgian, and some other languages from the region and outside of the region. So languages are a big part of my life, big part of my professional activities.
So we're going to take away
Yes.
your U.S. passport now, because clearly you're like you have defected to the evil empire.
Practically, yes. Yeah, I keep the passport, but I have another one too.
Okay, good. Which is the other one?
Georgia.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's right, because getting residencies here is relatively easily. It's like you can get a 1-year visa just for travel visa, just like by default, everybody, right?
It has a 1-year visa-free policy, and over the years, getting citizenship.
For what countries? Sorry,
I'm talking about Georgia.
No, I know, but
almost any country.
almost any country can
almost-
come here
yes.
for a year. That's why
That's correct.
all of Russia is moving in.
A lot, but actually Georgia is one of maybe a list of 5 or 6 countries that are open to Russians at this point. So
Okay.
there are others as well. But yeah, there are a lot of Russians in Georgia.
How
as
long
of
does
the
it take
past
you to
8
get
months.
citizenship?
So it's now more difficult. At the time, it was quite easy. In fact, I know someone who 12 or 14 years ago simply filled out an online form in a few minutes, emailed it off, and she got her Georgian passport by mail a couple of weeks later. So it's been going from that extreme level of simplicity to gradually getting more and more complicated over the years.
That was back in the day with Saakashvili.
That was back in the day when Saakashvili basically offered citizenship to everyone.
Got it.
And at this point, it's now gotten
Why
quite
was
a
he
bit
doing
more
that?
difficult.
What was the logic?
Interesting. So he was a young progressive leader who wanted to make big changes in the country. And one of the ways he did that was by opening it up and trying to attract foreign interest in the country. First, the interest of anyone who would come and visit and see the country is a fresh new, at their new beginnings, and also foreign direct investment.
Okay.
So, yeah, and Georgia continues that policy to this day as far as being inviting towards foreigners and yeah, almost anyone can come here. There are a ton of freelancers. It's a great place to live and be centered because it's surrounded by Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Africa. It's kind of in the middle of everything.
It is in the center of the universe.
That's right. Every country is in the center of its own universe.
That is in the conclusion of my book. I wrote that. Anyway, so let's get into the meat of the topic, which is the Ukraine war. We're recording this in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, not Atlanta. And how's the war going to end?
Yeah, the war's can.
Sorry, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
The special military operation.
Of course, that some Russians mistakenly call a war when they
Shame on
forget,
them.
when they forget their prompt.
How do you say war versus special military operation in Russian?
Война is war.
Война.
Специальная военная операция is SVO or SMO in English. Special military operation.
Oh, they actually have an acronym for it?
Yeah.
Because they have to say it so often.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so how's it going to end? Your crystal ball, your foggy crystal ball.
So I know I'm going to be wrong, but
Yes.
Let's lay out 2 main scenarios.
You can assign percentage probabilities
great.
that to make it more
Yeah.
clear your thinking.
Yeah. So 90% chance I'll be wrong. Let's start with that.
Just be safe on yourself. Say 99.
10% left for my 2 scenarios.
Exactly. Okay.
So scenario 1 is that Russian society cannot handle the losses in human life. There's increasing tension between military factions, between the FSB, which is
It's their KGB descendants.
essentially, yeah, and the army. So there are tensions between these different groups, and then there are private armies like the Wagner group, and they're all taking part in the war. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction among different groups. And there's an attempt by the Kremlin to finally set up proper organization of all these different structures. But there's a lot of tension. Russian society has been subject to a lot of propaganda, or let's just say framing of the military operation in a particular way. So people who are going off to war, they are convinced they're going to fight fascists. They're convinced they're going to see Nazis there.
Right.
And they're often surprised by what they see. They're surprised by the poor reception they get from the local population. They're surprised by how poorly they're equipped, how poor their own organization is, how their leadership drops them off in locations and often doesn't give them clear instructions or doesn't properly equip them. Of course, I'm repeating stories that tend to reach other countries. There's kind of an information filter. For example, if you're fighting an enemy, are you going to convey to the outside world the intercepted phone calls that show your enemy as competent, kind, or neutral, at least objective? No, of course not.
Right.
So we're dealing with information that's skewed, and we have to realize that.
As they say, the first victim of war is truth.
Yeah. But I think there are ways that you can kind of triangulate the information that you're getting to get an objective picture.
Well, that's why I'm so excited to talk with you, Richard, because you can actually, I can't listen to Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
I can only listen to Western propaganda. And that's what it is. We have to remind ourselves, which is what you're doing, which is that, hey, what we're getting is a certain level of propaganda, and it's hard to figure out. And you are well suited because you have a foot in both worlds to kind of take your best guess. Because, of course, like you say, you don't know 100% either. You could be wrong too.
Yeah, when I argue with people on Twitter from the West who...
You argue on Twitter? Nobody argues on Twitter.
Who would do that? What a waste of time. But people in the West who are against the war and have a lot of pro-Russia, or let's say anti-Ukraine ideas, they assume that everyone is watching the same Western media. They assume that I'm watching Western TV or something. That's simply not the case. Right. I follow a bunch of military experts. I'm listening to the intercepted phone calls that pop up. I'm watching the Russian propaganda, reading people's analysis of propaganda. I'm listening to the updates from the Ukrainian military specialists and so forth. So I'm getting a lot of different sources. And if you're rooting for the Ukrainians and you hear information about how the war is going poorly for the Russians from Russian propaganda, I mean, that's a very good sign.
Absolutely.
So if the propaganda of the other side is confirming the information that you have,
I agree.
That is one of the ways that you can triangulate.
Absolutely.
Your views.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to your scenarios, and your percentages.
Okay.
So scenario one
is that Russian society internally cannot handle
the death
toll. And so people are coming back very angry from the war, angry about how they've been mistreated by their own leadership, perhaps tricked and so forth. Also, all the people who are being drafted who don't want to fight in the war, and they're being forced, and this just heats up. It's like it's like a pot being brought to boil. Right. And at some point that just breaks up. Right. So the country breaks up, the leadership breaks up, there's some sort of coup, or they just move Putin aside.
But roughly first half of 2023.
Yeah, let's say that. That's the time frame for that.
Okay, fine. And what's scenario two?
Scenario two looks worse for Ukraine, and that is if Russia continues targeting energy infrastructure and other key infrastructure that makes the winter very difficult for Ukrainians, such that millions are forced to flee the country, creating a humanitarian crisis. Let's say the winter is also very bad for Europe, not just in terms of heating and energy, but let's say there's a global financial crisis. We know that Europe and other markets are not doing very well financially. Some currencies could blow up. There could be protests regarding inflation. There could be, I don't know, a blow up of the bond markets and stuff like that. And I think Russia is counting on that and hoping for that. And if there's unrest in Europe to the point where the politicians can't keep things together, and there's a Ukrainian humanitarian crisis at the same time, and there's a lot of discord about whether to support Ukraine and how much support to give, things could just become very protracted, and it could turn into an even greater humanitarian disaster than it is.
What I'm trying to say is that one is worse for Russia and the other one is worse for Ukraine.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you assign the probabilities of each? Would you say it's 30-70, 70-30?
So between those two, yeah, I'd say 70-30 in favor of Russia's internal collapse.
Okay, got it. All right. And who would replace Putin if that were to happen?
It depends at what stage the collapse occurs. So the later the collapse occurs relative to the military position, the greater the chance of a true realignment within Russia. So if Putin were replaced today, he'd probably be replaced by some even worse military hardliner. But if he's replaced 7 months from now,
let's say one, presumably they may have lost.
That's right.
Lots more territory.
In other words, the greater the military defeat at the time when
whoever
this
takes
internal
over
collapse takes place, the greater the chances of a completely new power arising in Russia.
Got it. Do you think that when the dust settles, Ukraine will retain Crimea? And should it, because of its historical association with Russia for the last couple hundred years, I suppose,
well,
after they kicked out the Tatars?
So it absolutely 100% should remain with Ukraine.
Okay.
The reason for that is because it's not a question of history, it's a question of international law.
Got it.
Okay, conventions were broken. There were many different breaches of international law, conventions, also the breach of trust, the manipulation of the referendum, and so forth. In international law and according to the constitutions of different countries, there's always a legal solution to these things. So, for example, if after Crimea returns to Ukraine, there's a strong organic movement towards independence, autonomy, or reunion with Russia, then there are legal ways of resolving those issues.
Just like South Sudan separated from Sudan.
Well, you could have like UN oversight.
Yeah,
You'd have a proper referendum, including all the people who were present in Crimea
at the time. So
2004. Everyone who lived in Crimea before 2014 can participate. No one who moved thereafter can participate, etc., etc. So observing all the proper
which is really
legalities. But if you want to do it fairly
and
legally, and one of the points of this war is justice must be restored. And that's what's at stake for the West.
And just to remind people who are listening, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons with Russia saying, give us your nuclear weapons, and in exchange we will promise your territorial integrity.
Yeah,
we will respect the borders,
your
sovereignty and your security.
And
so that was an utter betrayal of that, of course.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So I understand your point. Great. But you think it will get it back? Realistically? Because I think so. Okay, then the next question is when does Putin or Russia push the nuclear button, if they do, and in what way? What percentage chance do you assign that there will be a nuke that's dropped in Ukraine? Yeah.
Well, here I defer to the military analysts who have been studying Russia and the Soviet Union for decades, who are versed in nuclear deterrence, and they understand what's happening behind the scenes. So we can't just go by what Elon Musk thinks, or
Why
what
not?
someone else who's just operating on the most superficial logic. So the nuclear issue, I mean, has decades of history behind it.
Right.
There's decades of thinking behind it as
Sure.
well. Decades of game theory.
Yeah.
And also there are people who study Putin and his power structure.
Right.
And who say that he would use it only if it would allow him to preserve power in Russia.
Okay.
So explain to me how the use of a nuke would strengthen his hold on power in Russia. You don't have to answer. I'm just
It's
giving
a
you
rhetorical
a difficult question.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But the only challenge with that is that we're basically, it's like, are we trying to get into old Putin's mind or the new Putin's mind? Because I feel like he's evolved as a person. I don't think he's the same leader today as he was 10 years ago. And so he has gotten distorted in some ways. He used to be, I always viewed him as a very shrewd, calculated person who knew his limits and was very incremental in his strategy. Now he seems to have gone off the rails. I respect his intelligence. I can't seem to convince myself that I'm fucking smarter than he is. Yeah, I just can't believe it. I'm like, how could I be more intelligent than Putin? I don't think I am. So therefore I'm saying, does he know something that I don't know? Or has he gone crazy? Those to me is the only option. So anyway, the point is that it's hard to get into his brain. And so if he's gone off the rails, he might, in his distorted brain, think that, yes, I can preserve power if I drop a nuke. It might strengthen my position. Now, you and I can sit here calmly in these chairs and say that that's a crazy idea. But we're trying to be quote-unquote logical, and in his distorted mind, you understand what I'm saying. Give me a percentage chance that you think a nuke is going to be dropped.
So for a nuke to drop, first of all, there's got to be a situation where Putin thinks he has something to gain.
Right.
There has to be a target.
In his mind.
In his mind.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to know.
There has to be a target that he can attack with a nuke to achieve the goal that he has in his mind. And it's not an easy task to identify that type of target. Also, what kind of target would not evoke a similar or worse response? So there are a lot of questions. And if he does press that button, first of all, will the chain of command convey that order to the person in charge of the nuke? And will that person press the button?
Right.
Because there were some, I think, some Mr. Petrov, some sergeant who saved the world from
I heard about that.
From nuclear catastrophe because he didn't believe the signal that came in.
I can put a link to that, what Richard is mentioning, in the show notes. But that's an interesting tale that we got. It was a Russian who basically saved the planet Earth from World War III.
So, and will that person press the button when he's ordered to? And if the button is pressed, will many of these old nukes, old warheads
have
actually
rusted.
fire? That's right.
Or when they land, will they actually detonate?
But okay, moving towards a percentage chance. So we see there's a clear escalation. One side does a bit more, another side does the next. And Putin has been moving up the scale of escalation. So the recent attacks on energy infrastructure with the purpose of basically making Ukrainians die of cold and starvation over the winter, that's an escalation.
Right.
And the logic of war is such that the next step of escalation is always beneficial, or it appears to be the right thing to do.
Right.
In a war.
Right.
Because each step is kind of a decision beyond which there's no way back.
Right.
And I think the only way that one side can act to de-escalate is if the costs are so great that stopping the war is better than continuing it.
Right.
But the costs really have to be enormous for that to happen, because society itself has been reoriented towards the war. Propaganda is focused on the war and going against the narrative, going against your own ideology that you've been forcing on people for years, is political suicide.
Right.
And so that's why de-escalation is difficult. And so it's possible that, after a few more levels of escalation, that it could come to that. So, I'd say 1 in 5 chance.
Okay.
1 in 5.
And would you And that's a tactical nuke, which is a lower grade yield nuke.
Yeah. Here's one scenario that was thrown out on Twitter by a Russian Tatar, who's a history and military specialist, more history than military. But so his scenario is kind of counterintuitive to, I think, the Western mind, and so it'll be interesting to your viewers.
Right.
So here's the idea. Right now, in Putin's mind and in the mind of Russians, Russia is fighting a weaker enemy, Ukraine. Losing to Ukraine is unacceptable. It shows Russia's weakness. If Russia were fighting NATO, for example, losing to NATO would be more or less respectable, if that makes sense.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, it's like the United States losing to Mexico.
Like, he can throw up his hands and say, well, we were fighting an enemy who was many times more powerful than us. Yeah.
Right.
But it's hard to play the narrative if they lose to Ukraine.
Right.
So, if Russia sees that it's losing, it could make some tactical nuclear strike somewhere in Ukraine in order to evoke a NATO response. NATO would come in, for example, and totally destroy the Black Sea Fleet. Right. And then that would shift the focus of attention from Russia fighting Ukraine to Russia fighting NATO.
We're against everybody.
And then after that, Putin can throw up his hands and say, well, we're forced to stop our military efforts because we're fighting a foe that is many times stronger than us. Right. And by this time, hopefully, people will have forgotten that the war was actually with Ukraine. Right. And then they
that Russia started.
Yeah. And too bad that 50,000
Ukrainians died.
Russian soldiers died. Too bad that we lost our entire Black Sea Fleet. Right. We'll just have to live with this, but we're still victorious because NATO couldn't take our country. Right.
Moscow still stands.
Except for Crimea, perhaps. Yeah, Moscow still stands. Right. And so by somehow switching the focus of attention from Ukraine as the enemy to NATO, the enemy is NATO as the enemy, that somehow this would allow the Russian leadership to control the narrative and thus keep their hold on power. I actually think that's an interesting scenario and something to maybe that will help your listeners kind of grasp the logic that Putin is dealing with.
Tough stuff. Okay, so anyway, we're going to have Richard back on the next episode where we're going to talk about the nuances between all these different Eastern European countries, especially Ukraine and Russia. Like, how similar are they? Is Ukraine and Russia similar as United States similar to Canada, that analogy? Or is that analogy break down in one way or another? And what is the future of Ukraine, future of Russia, and other parts of Eastern Europe? And finally, Georgia as well, where we're recording this. So if you want to hear that episode, make sure you subscribe and give this little video a thumbs up or tell other people about the podcast. This is France Tapon encouraging you to wander and learn. Thank you, Rick.